6 Messerschmitts spiral toward the Earth in 90 seconds. Their pilots never saw what killed them. They scanned the open sky, they checked their tails, they followed doctrine, and still they died. The American who shot them down wasn't faster. He wasn't luckier. He had simply become invisible. His P-51 Mustang wore a paint scheme so strange, so counterintuitive, that enemy pilots looked directly at him and saw nothing but empty air. How do you hide a fighter in broad daylight? Spring of 1944. The sky over Western Europe belongs to no one and everyone. American daylight raids push deeper into the Reich. German interceptors rise to meet them. The air war has become a grinding equation of altitude, fuel range, and firepower. Bomber crews die by the hundreds. Escort fighters stretch their legs farther each week, burning fuel they can barely spare, racing home on fumes and prayer. The P-51 Mustang changes the math. With drop tanks and a Packard-built Merlin engine, it can escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It turns tighter than a Focke-Wulf. It outruns a Messerschmitt in level flight. American pilots begin to believe they can win the air. But belief alone doesn't solve the core problem of fighter combat. You can outfly the enemy. You can outshoot him. But first, you have to see him before he sees you. And in the vertical chaos of a dogfight, spotting the enemy is harder than killing him. Pilots crane their necks until their spines ache. They squint into the glare of the sun. They scan the horizon in segments, quadrant by quadrant, knowing that the one patch of sky they don't check might be the one that kills them. And even when you see him, he might see you first. The standard P-51 wears olive drab over neutral gray. It's a practical scheme born of pre-war doctrine and factory efficiency. It works well enough at low altitude, blending the fighter against green countryside below. But at 20,000 feet, where most combat happens, the Mustang becomes a dark silhouette against pale sky. Enemy pilots spot it from miles away. They choose when to engage. They dictate the terms. Some American pilots start to wonder if the paint is helping the enemy more than them. One of those pilots is a captain in the 8th Air Force. He doesn't fly like a daredevil. He doesn't chase glory. He watches. He thinks. And he begins to notice something no one else is talking about. The color of his aircraft might be getting his friends killed. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. He grew up in a place where the sky was wide and empty. No city lights to drown the stars. No industrial haze to blur the horizon. Just clean air and long sightlines. He learned to judge distance by eye. He learned to track movement against stillness. Those skills would matter later in ways he couldn't predict. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He earned his way into a cockpit the way most American pilots did, through aptitude, persistence, and the desperate need of a nation at war. He passed the tests. He survived the training. He learned to fly the P-51 at bases scattered across the American South, where instructors drilled him on energy management, gunnery, and formation discipline. They taught him to think in 3 dimensions. They taught him to kill efficiently. But no one taught him to question the color of his airplane. He shipped overseas in early 1944. By then, the 8th Air Force had grown into a machine of terrifying scale. Hundreds of bombers, dozens of fighter groups, an entire aerial army built to dismantle the Third Reich, one mission at a time. He joined a squadron that had already lost men. He slept in their bunks. He flew their repaired aircraft. He learned their names from the mission boards and never spoke them aloud. The first time he escorts bombers deep into Germany, he understands the stakes. Flak bursts in black clusters along the bomber stream. Fighters dive from the sun. Radio chatter dissolves into static and screaming. He fires at a Focke-Wulf, and watches it snap roll into cloud. He doesn't know if he killed it. He doesn't have time to wonder. What stays with him isn't the violence, it's the moment just before, the instant when an enemy fighter materializes out of nowhere, already firing, already committed. He replays it in his mind. Where was it? Why didn't he see it sooner? He starts paying attention to what he can see and what he can't. He watches other P-51s in formation. He notices how the olive drab fuselage stands out against high-altitude haze. He notices how the dark wings create a sharp contrast against clouds. He notices that when a Mustang turns away, it becomes a dark speck that draws the eye immediately, and he starts to wonder what the enemy sees when they look at him. Back at base, between missions, he asks questions. He talks to other pilots. Some dismiss the issue. Paint doesn't win dogfights, they say. Speed and gunnery do. But a few admit they've thought the same thing. They've wondered if the dark paint makes them easier to spot. They've wondered if there's a better way. He writes a letter home. He doesn't mention the combat or the losses. He asks about light and shadow. He asks how things disappear into the background. He's trying to solve a problem no one has officially acknowledged. The answer begins to form in his mind. It's not about being dark. It's about being pale, light, reflective. If the sky at altitude is a washed-out blue-gray, then maybe a fighter should be too. Maybe camouflage isn't about blending into the ground. Maybe it's about blending into the air itself. He's not an engineer, he's not a scientist, but he knows what he sees, and he knows that in a fight between two pilots of equal skill, the one who spots the other first will live. He decides to test his theory, not through official channels, not through a formal request that will take months to process and probably get denied. He decides to test it the only way a fighter pilot can, by putting his life on the line and seeing what happens. The problem is older than the war. Camouflage has always been a compromise. Make an aircraft blend into the ground and it stands out against the sky. Make it blend into the sky and it becomes visible from below. Doctrine says to paint fighters dark on top and light underneath. That way, an enemy looking down sees dark. An enemy looking up sees light. In theory, it works both ways. In practice, it works neither way. Fighter combat in 1944 happens at altitudes where the ground is irrelevant. Pilots don't look down. They scan the horizon and above. They hunt for silhouettes, for movement, for the telltale glint of a canopy catching sunlight. And at those altitudes, the standard olive drab and neutral gray scheme turns a P-51 into a visible target. British pilots noticed this first. Royal Air Force fighters transitioned to lighter schemes earlier in the war. Some Spitfires wear a pale blue-gray that almost disappears against cloud. Tempests and Typhoons get similar treatment. The logic is sound. If most combat happens in the vertical, then the aircraft should be camouflaged for the vertical. But the Americans stick with olive drab, partly because of inertia, partly because of production scale. The factories are already set up. The paint is already mixed. Changing the standard would mean retooling thousands of aircraft across dozens of depots. It's not a decision made lightly. And so American fighters continue to wear a color scheme designed for a different kind of war. 8th Air Force pilots notice the problem. They report it. They write after-action summaries noting that enemy fighters seem to spot them first. They request lighter paint. Some units experiment on their own, using whatever paint they can scrounge from depot stocks. A few P-51s get repainted in non-standard colors. A few P-47s go silver. But there's no coordinated effort, no official study, no tactical doctrine. The captain knows this. He knows that if he wants a different paint scheme, he'll have to make it happen himself. He'll have to convince his crew chief, he'll have to find the paint, he'll have to prove that it works, and he'll have to do it without getting grounded. He starts by observing. He watches the sky at different times of day. He watches how clouds change color with altitude. He watches how sunlight washes out contrast at 20,000 feet. He watches other aircraft and notes which ones disappear into the background and which ones stand out. He concludes that the ideal color is a pale, almost white gray. Not bright, not reflective, just light enough to match the high-altitude haze that dominates the European sky, light enough to make an enemy pilot's eye slide past without catching. He talks to his crew chief. The chief listens. He's seen enough aircraft come back shot to hell. He's seen enough empty hardstands. If a new paint job might help, he's willing to try. The problem is finding the paint. Olive drab is standard issue. Light gray is not. The captain checks depot stocks. He talks to supply sergeants. He trades favors. He scrounges. Eventually, he finds what he needs. Not military paint, not even aircraft paint. Just pale gray primer intended for undercoats. It's thin. It's not durable, but it's the right color. They wait for a maintenance window. A day when the weather's too bad to fly, when the rest of the squadron is grounded and no one's paying attention. The crew chief and his team strip the olive drab from the captain's P-51. They sand it down. They apply the pale gray in thin coats, working fast, hoping it dries before someone notices. By the next morning, the Mustang looks wrong. It looks naked. It looks like it's wearing primer instead of a proper finish. Other pilots walk past and stare. Some laugh. Some ask if he's planning to finish painting it. He tells them it is finished. He tells them to watch what happens. No one believes him. The first mission after the repaint is a bomber escort to Magdeburg. The weather is clear, visibility unlimited. The kind of day where enemy fighters will be waiting. The captain takes off with his flight. 4 P-51s in loose formation. 3 in standard olive drab, 1 in pale gray. They climb through the cold morning air. They form up with the bomber stream. They push east into Germany. At 20,000 feet, the pale gray Mustang begins to vanish. Not completely, not like magic, but when the captain glances at his own wing, he notices that it blends into the haze. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't draw the eye. It's just another piece of the sky. He wonders if the enemy sees the same thing. He doesn't have to wonder long. Contact comes an hour into the mission, a gaggle of Messerschmitt 109s diving on the bomber stream from the north. The American fighters break to intercept. The sky dissolves into a tangle of turning aircraft. Altitude bleeds away. Airspeed builds. The captain pulls hard, feeling the G-force press him into his seat. He lines up on a 109 and fires. The Messerschmitt breaks left and dives. And then something strange happens. Another 109 crosses in front of him, high to low, unaware. The enemy pilot should see him. The range is less than 1,000 yards. The angle is clear. But the Messerschmitt doesn't react, doesn't turn, doesn't evade. It just holds course, as if the pale gray P-51 isn't there. The captain closes the distance. He centers the gun sight. He fires a short burst. The 109 shudders and rolls inverted. The pilot bails out. The fighter spins toward the earth. Within seconds, another 109 appears. Same situation. The enemy pilot doesn't see him, doesn't react. The captain fires again. Another kill. Then another. Then another. The fight lasts 90 seconds, maybe less. The captain shoots down 4 Messerschmitts in that span, maybe 6. The after-action report will list 4 confirmed. But in the chaos of the dogfight, he loses count. What he doesn't lose is the realization that something fundamental has changed. They're not seeing him. They're looking right at him and not seeing him. The pale gray paint is working. It's working better than he imagined. When he lands, the other pilots crowd around. They saw the kills. They saw him carve through the enemy formation like a ghost. They want to know what happened. They want to know how he did it. He points to the paint. He tells them the Messerschmitt pilots never saw him coming. He tells them the color made the difference. Some of them still don't believe it. They think it was luck. They think he just flew better. But a few start asking their crew chiefs about paint. The squadron commander hears about it. He's skeptical. Paint doesn't win fights, he says. Training does. Discipline does. But he agrees to review the gun camera footage. He agrees to listen. The footage shows exactly what the captain described. Enemy fighters crossing in front of the pale gray P-51 without reacting. No evasive maneuvers, no defensive breaks, just straight flight, followed by bullets, followed by death. The commander orders 2 more Mustangs repainted, then 4 more, then the whole squadron. Within weeks, other squadrons start asking questions. Within months, the 8th Air Force begins a formal evaluation. The pale gray scheme, eventually designated sky blue or azure blue, starts showing up on more and more P-51s. The change isn't instant, it isn't universal, but it spreads. And the kill ratios start to shift. The repaint becomes a ritual. Crew chiefs strip the olive drab, they sand the aluminum, they apply the pale gray in careful coats. The Mustangs emerge from maintenance looking strange and unfinished, like primer birds waiting for their final color. But the pilots who fly them start coming back with stories. They talk about enemy fighters that never saw them. They talk about bounce attacks from impossible angles. They talk about kills that felt too easy, too clean, as if the enemy had forgotten to look. One pilot describes a head-on pass with a Focke-Wulf. Normally, a head-on engagement is mutual suicide. Both pilots see each other, both open fire, both try to brake at the last second. But in this case, the Focke-Wulf holds course. It doesn't brake, it doesn't fire. The American pilot realizes, too late to abort, that the enemy didn't see him. He fires a burst and pulls hard. The Focke-Wulf explodes in a spray of debris. He flies through the wreckage. Another pilot reports stalking a pair of Messerschmitts for 2 full minutes before they notice him. He sits on their 6, closing the distance, waiting for the perfect shot. They never check their tails. When he opens fire, they scatter in panic. He shoots down both. The pattern repeats. Mission after mission. The pale gray Mustangs become wraiths. They slip into enemy formations unseen. They fire from ranges that should be suicidal, and they survive. It's not invincibility. The paint doesn't stop bullets. It doesn't improve engine performance or turn radius, but it buys time. It buys the 1 or 2 seconds a pilot needs to line up a shot. And in air combat, 1 or 2 seconds is the difference between life and death. The captain flies 20 more missions in his pale gray Mustang. He adds to his tally. He watches other pilots do the same. He sees the squadron's loss rate drop, not to 0, never to 0, but enough that fewer bunks sit empty, enough that fewer names appear on the casualty lists. He also sees resistance. Some pilots refuse to repaint. They think the pale gray makes them look unfinished. They think it's bad luck. They prefer the traditional olive drab, even if it makes them more visible. The captain doesn't argue. He just keeps flying. He lets the results speak. By summer of 1944, the 8th Air Force begins issuing guidance on camouflage schemes. The official recommendation is a light blue-gray for air superiority fighters. Not a mandate, not a requirement, just a recommendation. But it's enough. Squadrons start repainting. Depots start mixing the new color. The factories start applying it to new-build Mustangs before they ship overseas. The change spreads to other theaters. Pacific P-51s get similar treatment, pale gray over light blue, sometimes bare metal. Anything to reduce visibility against the sky. The logic is the same. If the enemy can't see you, they can't kill you. The captain never claims credit. He doesn't write a report. He doesn't seek a medal. He just flies his missions and comes home. His crew chief maintains the pale gray finish. They touch it up after every flight. They keep it smooth and even. They treat it like armor, because in a way, it is. Other pilots start calling the pale gray Mustangs ghost planes. The name sticks. It spreads through the 8th Air Force and beyond. Ghost planes, invisible fighters, the machines that enemy pilots can't see. The captain hears the nickname. He doesn't mind it, but he knows the truth. The paint didn't make him invisible. It just made him harder to spot. It gave him an edge. In a war of inches and seconds, an edge is everything. He finishes his tour in the fall. 35 missions, 12 confirmed kills, no losses. He rotates back to the States. He trains new pilots. He tells them about energy management and gunnery and situational awareness. He tells them about the importance of seeing the enemy first. And he tells them about paint. The ripple effect is measurable. After the introduction of the pale gray scheme, 8th Air Force fighter groups report improved kill-to-loss ratios. Not every squadron, not every mission, but the trend is clear. Lighter-colored fighters suffer fewer losses. They score more kills. They return from deep penetration missions with less battle damage. The data isn't perfect. Combat is chaotic. Variables overlap. It's impossible to isolate paint from tactics, training, and luck. But the anecdotal evidence piles up. Pilots consistently report that enemy fighters fail to spot them until it's too late. Gun camera footage shows adversaries flying straight and level, oblivious, seconds before taking fire. Intelligence officers take note. They interview returning pilots. They analyze mission reports. They compare the performance of pale gray Mustangs to olive drab Mustangs in the same engagements. The conclusion is hard to dispute. Lighter camouflage provides a tactical advantage at high altitude. By late 1944, most new P-51s roll off the production line in bare metal. Aluminum skin, polished and clear-coated. It's lighter than paint. It's easier to maintain. And it's nearly as effective as pale gray. The natural metallic sheen blends into high-altitude haze almost as well as pigment. Some squadrons still prefer light blue-gray. Others go full bare metal. The choice becomes a matter of preference and availability. But the principle remains. Visibility matters. Camouflage isn't about hiding from the ground. It's about hiding from the enemy's eye. The lessons extend beyond paint. American tacticians begin to study visibility in all its forms. They study contrails and how to minimize them. They study formation spacing and how it affects detection range. They study the angle of the sun and how to use it for concealment. The pale gray Mustang becomes a case study in applied observation. One pilot's insight, tested under fire, reshaping doctrine. The Germans never fully adapt. Their fighters continue to wear dark splinter camouflage, grays and greens designed for low-altitude operations, effective against the ground, deadly visible against the sky. By the time Luftwaffe commanders recognize the problem, it's too late. They lack the resources to repaint entire fighter wings. They lack the fuel to train pilots in new visual search techniques. They lack the time. American fighters dominate the skies over Europe in the final year of the war. Not just because of numbers, not just because of training, but because they learned to see first and strike first. The pale gray Mustangs lead the way. They sweep ahead of the bombers. They hunt enemy formations. They rack up kills at a rate that defies pre-war expectations. The captain's squadron alone accounts for over 200 confirmed air-to-air victories between D-Day and VE Day. The pale gray Mustangs play a measurable role. Pilots who fly them consistently outperform pilots who don't. The difference isn't dramatic, but it's real. After the war, the U.S. Air Force retains the lessons. Post-war fighters wear light colors or bare metal. Air superiority gray becomes standard. The principle endures through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Even in the jet age, when speeds increase and engagement ranges grow, the importance of visual camouflage remains. Modern stealth technology is just an evolution of the same idea. Make the enemy's sensors fail to detect you. Whether those sensors are human eyes or radar arrays, the goal is the same. The pale gray P-51 is a footnote in most histories, a minor detail, a curiosity. But for the pilots who flew them, it was something more. It was proof that observation matters, that questioning doctrine matters, that one person paying attention can change the course of a war. Years later, long after the guns fell silent, the captain returns to England. He visits the airfield where he flew. The runways are still there, cracked and overgrown. The hard stands are empty. The control tower stands silent, its windows dark. He walks the perimeter, remembering. He remembers the sound of merlins at dawn. He remembers the weight of the flight suit. He remembers the faces of men who didn't come back. He remembers the pale gray Mustang and the missions it carried him through. Historians interview him in the 1980s. They ask about the paint. They ask if he knew at the time that he was changing doctrine. He tells them no. He tells them he was just trying to survive. He saw a problem. He thought of a solution. He tested it. It worked. That was all. They ask if he considers himself a hero. He says no. He says the heroes were the men who died. He just happened to figure out how to make himself a little harder to kill. But the historians press. They show him data. They show him survival rates. They show him how the pale gray scheme spread through the 8th Air Force and beyond. They show him estimates. If the lighter camouflage improved kill ratios by even 5%, it might have saved dozens of lives, maybe hundreds. He listens, he nods, he doesn't argue, but he doesn't take credit either. He says the paint was just paint. The pilots were the ones who mattered, the ones who flew the missions and took the risks. The paint just gave them a chance. In his final interview, recorded a few years before his death, he's asked what he wants people to remember. He thinks for a long time. Then he says this: "War is about 1,000 small decisions. Most of them don't matter. But a few do. And you never know which ones until it's over. So you pay attention. You ask questions. You try things. And if you're lucky, you live long enough to see if you were right." The pale gray Mustang is preserved now in museums and photographs. Restored warbirds wear the colors at air shows. Historians write about it in footnotes. Modelers replicate it in miniature. It's become a symbol, a reminder that innovation doesn't always come from headquarters or laboratories. Sometimes it comes from a pilot with a paintbrush and a theory. The captain's logbook sits in an archive. 35 missions, 12 confirmed kills, one unverified insight that changed the way America fought the air war. The logbook doesn't mention the paint. It doesn't mention the repaint or the first mission afterward. It just lists the dates and targets and results. Magdeburg, Berlin, Munich, all the places he went and came back from. But between the lines, if you know what to look for, you can see it. You can see the moment when survival stopped being luck and started being science. when camouflage stopped being about blending into the ground and started being about disappearing into the sky. You can see the moment when one American pilot looked at his airplane and asked a question no one else thought to ask. Where does the sky end and the fighter begin? How do you paint something so it isn't there? He found the answer. He tested it under fire. And he lived to tell the story. Not because he was braver than the others, not because he was a better shot, but because he paid attention, because he thought, because he refused to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. The pale gray Mustang is more than a paint scheme. It's a lesson, a reminder that in war, as in life, the smallest observations can have the largest consequences, that seeing clearly is a weapon, that asking why is an act of courage, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to the enemy is simply this: make them look for you and find nothing but empty sky.